When two friends ventured into Radium Springs Cave in 1955, they faced unforeseen dangers. This is the harrowing tale of Murray Anderson and Donald Garu, whose adventure into the depths of Radium Springs Cave in Georgia turned into a nightmare. Radium Springs, situated approximately 12 miles east of Albany in southwest Georgia, has long captivated divers and explorers. Originally known as Blue Springs, it was renamed in 1925, following the detection of radium in its crystal-clear blue waters. The extensive cave system beneath the springs held an irresistible allure for many, with whispers of unmapped sections and breathtaking caverns waiting to be discovered. Murray Anderson, a U.S. Navy SEAL in his late 20s, had caught wind of Radium Springs Cave through a fellow caving enthusiast. The prospect of exploring uncharted territory set his pulse racing. Murray was not a beginner. He had over 200 hours of dive experience and had explored numerous underwater cave complexes throughout Georgia. His friend Donald, while less experienced, shared an equal eagerness to take on the challenge. The cave was notorious for its treacherous layout. To reach the rumored unmapped section, divers had to navigate compressed sharp tunnels, remove their tanks to squeeze through tight passages, and manage their air supply with extreme precision. These obstacles frightened many, but for Murray and Donald, they only intensify the thrill. On Friday morning in 1955, Murray and Donald arrived at Radium Springs, their excitement palpable in the warm Georgia air. They began preparing their gear, much of which was homemade, a common practice among divers in the 1950s, when high-quality commercial equipment was both scarce and prohibitively expensive. Their plan was ambitious. They would split up shortly after entering the cave to cover more ground and map as much of the unexplored areas as possible. As they descended into the cave that summer day, they were immediately struck by the otherworldly beauty of their surroundings. The crystal-clear water allowed their flashlights to penetrate deep into the cavern, revealing stunning rock formations and hidden passages. It was a sight few had ever witnessed, and the thrill of discovery fueled their determination to press on. They waded into the blue waters of the spring. At chest depth, they inserted their regulators and descended towards the partially concealed 3-foot cave opening at the bottom. In a decision that would later prove fatal, they chose not to anchor a safety line at the entrance, which was a critical error for divers exploring unfamiliar cave systems. Once inside, Murray and Donald were enveloped in a world of darkness, their homemade flashlights providing the only illumination. The cave floor was blanketed in a thick layer of sediment, requiring careful movement to avoid stirring it up and reducing visibility. For about 30 minutes, they swam deeper into the cave, encountering numerous side chutes branching off from the main passage. Roughly 200 feet into the cave, Donald decided he'd had enough. Something felt off, and a sense of unease was creeping over him. Using hand gestures, he communicated to Murray that he wanted to turn back. Murray, however, wasn't ready to end the dive. He felt he hadn't accomplished what he came to do and was determined to press on. After a brief, silent argument underwater, Donald gave Murray the thumbs up and turned back, leaving his friend alone in the darkness. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As Donald made his way back to the surface, Murray ventured deeper into the cave system, entering a narrow side chute off the main passage. The water was still relatively clear, but Murray's excitement led to carelessness. He inadvertently agitated the sediment on the cave floor, causing visibility to plummet to near zero in a matter of seconds. Suddenly, Murray found himself in a precarious situation. His dim flashlight was useless in the sediment-choked water, and he could barely see his own hands in front of his face. Panic began to set in as he realized he couldn't find his way back to the main passage. He grasped at the walls, hoping to feel an opening, but encountered only solid rock. As fear took hold, Murray's breathing rate increased dramatically. This natural response to stress would prove disastrous underwater, rapidly depleting his limited air supply. He was now approaching the point of no return, with his oxygen reserves dwindling faster than anticipated. Meanwhile, on the surface, Donald had emerged from the cave and was beginning to worry. He knew Murray was an experienced diver who often pushed the limits, but as the minutes passed by, Concern began to outweigh confidence. When it became clear that Murray's air supply must have been exhausted, Donald faced a difficult decision: attempt a rescue himself, wait and hope for a miracle, or call for help. Wisely choosing not to risk his own life by re-entering the cave alone and with depleted air, Donald reported Murray missing and managed to contact 2 fellow divers from their club. By the time they arrived, however, the sun had already set. Despite the darkness, the 3 men geared up and entered the water. They swam to the cave entrance and began their search, but the poor visibility made the task nearly impossible. After 2 exhausting hours, they were forced to abandon the search because their own air supplies were running dangerously low. The following morning, a team of senior divers from the naval base in Charleston, South Carolina, arrived to conduct a thorough search. Within minutes of entering the cave, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Murray's body was found floating near the top of the cave, exactly where he and Donald had parted ways the day before. The tragedy of Murray's death was compounded by the realization that several avoidable errors had contributed to the disaster. Starting the dive at noon left little daylight for potential rescue operations. Splitting up in an unfamiliar and dangerous environment dramatically increased the risks. The failure to use a safety line made it impossible for Murray to find his way back once disoriented. Poor air management led to a rapid depletion of his oxygen supply. The recovery of Murray's body allowed investigators to piece together his final moments. His regulator was no longer in his mouth, suggesting he had either removed it in a moment of panic or it had been knocked loose as he struggled in the narrow confines of the cave. The flashlight that had failed him was still attached to his diving harness. Murray Anderson's death marked one of the first known cave diving fatalities in the United States. However, his tragic end catalyzed significant changes in cave diving practices. The incident highlighted the need for specialized training, equipment redundancy, and strict adherence to safety protocols. In the wake of the Radium cave disaster, new guidelines were established. Divers were strongly advised never to dive alone in caves. The importance of carrying multiple light sources became paramount. The use of safety lines was emphasized as a non-negotiable practice. Air management techniques were refined, with many adopting even more conservative approaches than the standard rule of thirds. It's crucial to understand the context in which Murray and Donald made their ill-fated decision to explore Radium Springs Cave. In the 1950s, recreational diving was still in its infancy. The equipment was elementary by today's standards, and formal training programs were scarce. Many divers, like Murray and Donald, relied on a combination of military experience, self-taught skills, and boldness. Murray's background as a U.S. Navy SEAL gave him a false sense of security. While his military training had undoubtedly prepared him for many underwater scenarios, cave diving presented a unique set of challenges that even his extensive experience hadn't fully equipped him to handle. The confined spaces, limited visibility, and complex navigation required in cave diving were different from the open water operations he was accustomed to. Donald, on the other hand, was less experienced, but equally eager. He looked up to Murray, trusting in his friend's judgment and skills. This dynamic likely played a role in their decision to split up inside the cave. The cave system beneath Radium Springs was a labyrinth of twisting passages and narrow tunnels. Its true extent was unknown at the time, adding to its mystique and appeal for adventurous divers. Later surveys would reveal that the cave stretched for approximately 2,500 feet and had a complex honeycomb structure. But in 1955, Murray and Donald were venturing into largely unknown territory. Today, Radium Springs Cave is closed to the public, with only occasional scientific expeditions permitted. The clear blue waters still hold their secrets, but the cost of uncovering them has proven too high. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to True Perils for more interesting content.